session post-lunch, I can understand that there'll be slightly, issues of attention. So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. My talk is going to be in two parts. We're going to have two rounds, is what we have discussed. The first round is going to be on issues that we face as regards patentability of CRI applications are concerned, and the second component will be what other tips that we probably can give from our side so as to increase or sort of highlight the chances of patentability when it comes down during prosecution or even during drafting of applications. So the second part will talk about some exemplary. That's okay, I was comfortable. Some exemplary steps, and then the first one was about the issues. So the issues will typically be about, will take a few minutes. There were three key issues that I wanted to highlight, which we at our firm, and then usually the interactions that we have with a lot of companies that are in the software and the high technology space, that we do really face as regards the Indian Patent Office is concerned, because that's the jurisdiction that I'll cover. The first is on a very, very widely discussed Section 3K, and all of us have probably been tired of listening about the CRI guidelines and what kind of implications does it have, what happened in 2015, 16, 17, and therefore I'll try and keep it as objective as possible. The first issue was on subject matter eligibility. What is patentable, which is the biggest issue facing us as regards when the prosecution happens or when the examination happens, which and how do we determine what subject matter will go through and which one would not. And as regards the current scenario is concerned, 2017 there were certain refinements where in 16 it was announced that you need to have a novel hardware. In 17 there was a clarification that came that you don't need a real hardware or a new novel hardware per se, but if you can basically establish that the manner in which the software talks to your underlying hardware has some implications or interactions which are beyond the normal interactions, you will typically be able to get through as regards that particular third step is concerned on patent eligibility. Some cases that we do regularly see have both these issues fairly evenly lined up, where you can look at some subject matters like some transaction calculation algorithm or a financial transaction or a trading platform or some very specific set of instances where the eligibility is very hard or very easy rather to determine and predict that this will be patentable, this will not be, because it sort of lies in a non-technical space, and the core inventive step is something that is purely on the software side, and therefore the incremental technical effect is very difficult to demonstrate irrespective of how you draft the application. However, there are certain cases which are borderline. Now, for example, if there is a system that is on a dynamic basis creating certain virtual machines, now the system essentially is, you're talking about the words like dynamically creating and the virtual machines which are not really tangible entities, but then the way you claim a subject matter then defines, or the way you write a patent application and the claims thereafter would then define whether what will go through and what you are trying to protect. And therefore for those subject matter, it's very critical, and which is the core issue why we have to face and ensure that the decision being taken and the manner in which we write the claims is something that will be construed as an improvement on the technical subject matter, and the terms don't really reflect a clear software being written. So the first issue, as I said, was on the subject matter eligibility. The second issue is in the manner in which we draft claims or the application from our side. So a lot of these patent applications that do get drafted use a lot of words which are very generic and business oriented, a user messaging system, a user interface, or a platform which enables you to basically do financial transactions. And these are specific terms which, as in when you do see in your patent application, will enable or probably prompt the examiner to face or give a 3K rejection right away. And therefore, the second core issue that we will be talking about and sort of will get answered, and I'm just highlighting the issues right now, is this particular fact of how do we write the claims in a manner such that the examiner does not prima facie sort of look at the claims and say that it is using terms, for example, user management or things which are very clearly software oriented and therefore need to be highlighted appropriately. The third issue as regards CRIs are concerned, it pertains to the positioning of the claims, now which is more not more on the patentability but more on the infringement side of practice, because a lot of times when when the subject matter gets evaluated, half of the invention or half of the implementation is really happening on the client side, and the remaining half is happening on the server side. And therefore, how do we draft a claim which basically does not enable or does not require divided infringement to be proven tomorrow when there is enforcement, is the third important issue that we will have to tackle out. And in such cases, as I will talk about in my second round, will be certain points that we'll have to position our claims such that they will always be either directed towards one particular device or one set of devices which will be coupled or integrated together when commercialized by the patentee in context. So we either write all the claims from the perspective of the server or from the client standpoint of one particular hardware device that receives and does all the transactions. But when we do look at claims being filed at the patent office these days, a lot of these claims are talking about sending a particular data packet or a message request, and then certain activities then happening at the server where they process that particular message. So the sending part of it happens at the client device, whereas the processing part really happens at the server. And therefore, how do you construe infringement when there's when a product comes and the company which is basically processing that particular architecture is only doing it at the client side? So these are the three core issues that I thought I'll highlight before the speakers sort of get in. One was on the eligibility of subject matter. How do we draft claims and what terms do we write so as to make them higher or increased likelihood of the examiners getting through? And the third was the positioning with respect to how do we ensure that there is clear infringement proven tomorrow when there is a product in context that comes in. So these were the 3 points. Issues, one was the eligibility of subject matter, the other was how do we approach drafting of claims so as to increase the likelihood, and the third was from an infringement standpoint of how do we ensure that there's no distributed infringement, and it sort of comes to the same. I have about 8 points, very quickly, about a minute on each point, and these are certain tips that practically have helped us and have sort of established the way we guys draft our applications. A few of them are fairly basic. One, for example, it has become a norm, as everybody would in the CRI space understand, that every method claim that we write, an independent method claim, every step of that particular claim these days is required to be tied up with the underlying hardware as regards a network device or a hardware device or a client device. Or so typically the format is that every method claim would have certain steps, and every step, for example, transmitting from a network device to a central computing device or a cloud device a certain set of data packets, and then receiving at the network device, and therefore every step gets coupled to a particular device or a hardware element, which enables you to sort of demonstrate some actions which are being done by tangible entities that form part of the network architecture. Second one is on the fact that people have sort of moved away. We look at applications being granted to Google, Apple, a lot of other tech companies in the US, where people are moving away from using functional modules these days, and they are using more when they write a system claim, they talk about a processor coupled to a memory having certain routines, wherein the routines which when executed by the one or more processors enable certain steps to happen again. So earlier there was a registration module, and then people used to have a transmission module or a communication module, but people have moved away slightly from the use of functional modules to either talk about certain steps that the system or the processor does, or they've started using terms more like engine, transmission engine or a communication engine, which is more of an interplay with words. It's really not that's not the core inventive step per se, but the manner in which you write the claims, that it sounds more technical, and therefore the prima facie opinion of the examiner is not negative around CRI, and therefore the use of words like engine units is relatively more recommended and preferred compared to modules or functional modules, which we used to have the figure 2 or figure 3 where there were certain modules. Gone are the days when we probably have, if you look at Google applications, and I'm just citing as example, but any good strong tech company in the US, they moved away from such figures. They've talked more about steps being done by respective hardware devices. The third was actually quite overlapping with George. Very good example. I had the same example here of we have to move away with every term that we now, for example, when I review claims of people in the firm that draft applications, or when we interview new patent attorneys to come on board, when we look at their claims, we also look at the kind of terms that they've used. If they talk about request and response and messaging and things which are again more non-tangible, non-technical as a matter of fact, versus people who then try to use words like signals. We don't have to talk about a financial transaction system. We then talk about a first set of data packets being sent across rather than a request message being sent across. Then the language automatically transitions from messages or requests or responses to more about a first set of data packets being sent from a first device to a second device, and then the second device basically extracting a second set of data packets from those first set of data packets and processes the second set of data packets to generate a third set, which is then sent across over the network to a particular device. So the more technical terms that you start working in, like data packets, like signals, like data transmission, the node architecture where there is more node to node, a first node and a second node which is interacting, the more lower you are on the OSI layer of networks, which is on the physical layer or on the data layer, the higher are the chances that the examiner will not construe a clear section 3K requirement or an objection on that issue. So it is very highly recommended that we look at every word that we are using, and what the first set of data packets mean or what the second set of data packets mean can always be explained and substantiated through clear examples in the spec. But when we write the claims, we have to look at each and every word, and if it somehow can be construed to be non-technical in nature, then we should always have an application where can there be a technical term to it? Can we talk about packets here? Can we talk about transmission of bits here? Or can we talk about words which are more about data structures, binary trees, navigation of data packets across a particular tree? Helps you to increase the likelihood of getting an allowance, compared to words like files or file system, which is again very software oriented in that sense. The second is another point is on the fact that as most of the patent offices these days do require you to explain the technical effect, why don't we talk about the technical effect and the solution in the spec itself? When we have these sections like abstract and summary and advantages and objects, where people probably don't pay too much of emphasis while writing advantages or objects of an invention, why can't we as a practice include a particular section like a technical problem solution section where you can really understand and interpret what the technical problem is that you're solving and what the technical solution is, so that tomorrow when there's an examination 3 years down the lane, you don't have to at that point in time think of what the technical problem was when I was drafting the application, because you're talking about 2 years, 3 years of a gap, and when you're drafting the application, you're best suited at that time to include a lot of subject matter which is technical rather than talk about it during the responses to the examination report. So we at the firm have a lot of formats where we encourage and we ask every attorney who's focusing on CRI matters to ensure that they have, if not a particular section, at least 3 or 4 paragraphs which very clearly said that this is the technical problem that I'm solving and this is how I'm solving it, so that tomorrow when it comes in the examination report, I can easily refer him back to those paragraphs and say this is what I'm doing. I don't have to explain or substantiate it at that stage. And if it becomes a part of my habit to include that as part of the section, I think it will become very helpful during prosecution 3 years or 2 years down the lane. Just a couple of more minutes here. We've also looked at during responses to the examination reports that we only cite UK case laws. We don't have a lot of scenarios where in the responses we cite corresponding Indian applications which have been allowed. So we as part of our responses have a lot of scenarios where we do look at similar applications which have been allowed in the last 1 or 2 years and do cite those, maybe by a different controller, but we do cite those cases that a similar case in a similar technology area granted in Calcutta Patent Office or in Chennai should be used as a precedent for me, rather than only depending on maybe 5 or 6 UK or European case laws which have become more boilerplate than adding any value to the response. talked about the OSI and the level of abstraction, and then so the second last point is on simulation results. So we did have a couple of inventions where fortunately the applicant in that context had certain simulation results so as to demonstrate that the manner in which the software and the hardware interacts really results in an improved performance of the underlying computing environment. So they had certain tables which talked about certain prior arts which had, this was the transaction time or this was the response time from the server during the prior arts, and what the current set of invention or the current invention has led to. So if you do have certain simulation results which you can carry out between those 6 months when the examination report comes in, some data, like it's very popular in pharmaceutical and life sciences area, but in software people don't give a lot of data which really can be given so as to substantiate increased performance of the computer. And if we can generate that kind of data in about 2 to 3 months, I think it will substantiate and help significantly to establish that there is increased computing efficiency and enable my app, because it becomes very hard for the examiner to then object and sort of deny my application on 3K. And the last point is on expedited examination, where I'm not biggest of the companies in India still don't really use that as an option, where it is very highly encouraged that people do file PCT applications with India as the search authority, and then and then file an expedited examination at the Indian Patent Office, because typically these days only startups and foreign entities do file national phases with expedited, but a lot of Indian companies, because they don't file PCTs, don't really get an option to file expedited, and therefore I think don't file PCTs only for national phases, but even if as a strategy it can save you a year and a half. I think it's worth contemplating whether we can file a PCT, select India as a search authority, and then file an express or expedited examination request so as to get an examination report in about 7 to 8 months compared to maybe about 2 years of what it would have taken otherwise. My point. We'll talk about the questions at the last, I think.
I'm sorry, unfortunately we are running out of time, and I would really like to give Biju.